been in Ireland once before. It was some 10 years ago when I attended in an EU Economic Policy Committee meeting here in Dublin. I brought my family and I took a week off, and we rented a car and had some lovely days during the beautiful countryside, trying to learn how to drive on the left side of the road, which wasn't so easy. But now I'm very happy to be back here again and given this possibility of learning more about the Irish society. And I think attending a seminar like this is an excellent way of doing that, to listening to interesting presentations and being asked to comment on these presentations. So in my comments, I would like to pick up 3 points. The first one is about the economic sustainability of the education system. The second and the third are 2 challenges that we are facing in Sweden. The first one, I believe we have in common with you. And the other one is more specific for Sweden and also Denmark, as we heard Jörgen told us about. But nevertheless, a challenge where I believe we can learn a lot from you. So let me start by the economic sustainability. I must admit I was a little bit surprised when I looked at the OECD data and saw that your public spending in education as relation to GDP was as high as ours. I think that's impressive, considering the fact that your total tax revenue as a percentage of GDP is much lower than ours. It is true that the tax pressure in Sweden has been reduced significantly since the year 2000, as you can see here in the blue line there. It is also true that some 2 to 3 percentage points of the differences between Sweden and Ireland has to do with the fact that a lot of social benefits that are free of tax in your system are taxed in our system. But also taking that into account, it's still a difference of almost 15 percentage points. As Minister Quinn has pointed out, you may now have to reduce your spendings on education a bit to handle the present economic crisis. And perhaps our experience from the 90s could be of some help. It might show that the cuts don't necessarily have to be permanent cuts. We went, as I'm sure you are all aware of, through a similar crisis as you are experiencing now, with crashed banks and huge increase in public debt and high unemployment. The positive side of that was that it paved the way for a lot of structural reforms in the Swedish economy that brought the Swedish economy into a much better shape. And the memories of the hard time during those years are still very strong among Swedish voters. So it has been easy for politicians to argue for sound public finances and for running surpluses over the business cycle in the public finances. So after a period in the late 90s, when we have to cut spending on, among other things, school budgets and increase taxes, we are now in the favorable situation where we could stabilize our spendings on education on at around 7% of GDP, and at the same time reduce taxes and run surpluses in the public finances. And according to the simulation we have done, there are neither any obvious demographic pressure on the total public cost for education. But money is definitely not all. Although we are in a favorable economic situation, we do definitely not lack challenges in the Swedish education system. The perhaps most obvious one, and here's the one I believe we have in common with you, is that that we are continually falling back in the international comparisons of school performances. This could be exemplified by looking at the PISA results. In mathematics that you see here, the mean score has been reduced significantly, both in Sweden as well as in Ireland. And there is, as Mr. Gertsen told us this morning, great differences between the Nordic countries here. This fall in results in PISA are even more pronounced when you look at the results in reading, where both in Ireland and Sweden we have seen a great fall in the results here. However, but what worries the very most, that is that the variance between schools increased dramatically. During the last decades, the Swedish education system has become much more segregated than it used to be. And the Finnish ambassador this morning mentioned that there's an increase in differences in Finland, but that's very small compared to Sweden. And also, as Anders Becker said, in Norway there's been a reduction, according to this data, on the differences. The Swedish government has introduced a wide range of reforms in order to reversing this severe development. We have strengthened the systems for inspection, evaluation and assessments of school results. We've allocated more resources to training of basic competences in reading and in writing and in mathematics. And we have introduced national tests in more subjects and at earlier stages in the lower and secondary and also at primary schools. And there are great expectations that this broad reform agenda would help us to revive some of the former strengths of the Swedish education system. But unfortunately, we have not yet seen any clear improvements in school results. The government is at the same time eager to figure out whether or not we are on the right track. So they have actually recently given a committee the task of figuring out how long we will have to wait before we can see any results. I don't know if the committee will be able to come up with any reasonable answer on that million-euro question. But the committee has also been given the more forward-looking task of how the conditions for evaluating future reforms could be improved. But what I believe is the most important factor, and perhaps also where we have the greatest challenges, that is to make teaching a more attractive profession. And this is also the same as we heard from Denmark here. There seems to be, as Mr. Ward mentioned this morning, seems to be a broad consensus among researchers that it is the quality of teaching that is being delivered in the classroom that really could make a difference. We need to retain the very best of our teacher staff, and at the same time attract more young, talented people to the profession. The starting salaries among teachers in Sweden are in line with their colleagues in other countries, but their income career is poorer, as you can see on this graph. Their salaries at the peak of the career are substantially lower in Sweden than in other European Union and OECD countries, and it's much lower than here in Ireland. And as one can expect, this had led to the situation where we are facing huge difficulties in attracting young, talented people to the profession. This has also been shown very clearly by researchers. who have used data from the test on the cognitive and social abilities that we used to do on all men at their enlistment to the military service. The researchers, they have ranked all the persons in the cohort according to the test scores, and then they have calculated the average score for those who later became teacher. And as you can see by the bold line here, the abilities of those who became teachers relative to other persons who are at the same age has gone down dramatically since the 1990s. The results are the same when the researchers instead measures ability by looking at the grades that the newly graduated teacher received when they left upper secondary school. And that is the dotted line here. And they could there also see that the trends is the same among women as it is among men. Although it is a broad consensus in Sweden that teachers are too low paid, and also almost all of them are publicly paid, it is not much the politicians can do to increase their relatively wages. Wages are set by social partners on the labor market. And the government would take a huge risk if they in some way try to intervene in this bargaining process. They will not only run the risk of compensation demand from other publicly paid employees, they would also hurt the confidence for the whole bargaining system that over the last 15 years has been gradually built up in a successful way. So the government has instead tried other ways to improve the quality of teaching in the classroom and to make the teacher profession more attractive. It includes, for example, subsidies to continuing professional training, campaigns to improve the image of becoming a teacher, and new and more highly paid steps in the teacher career ladder. As a result of this, we are beginning to see some small sign of an increasing number of applicants to teacher college. But I believe we have a long way to go before the teaching profession has the same status in Sweden as here in Ireland. So, to sum up, I'm impressed by your capacity to spend as much as we do on education, and at the same time have much lower tax pressure than we have. Given the present economic conditions, you will probably have to make cuts in the school budgets. But our experience from the 90s show that it's quite possible to come out of the crisis with a strengthened economy that could bear the necessary costs of the future challenges in the education system. Secondly, we are both falling back in the international comparison of schools' results, and we are struggling with increasing differences between schools. This is where I think the exchange of experience are of most importance. But when it comes to the question of what effect the ambitious reform agenda in the Swedish system will have, the jury is unfortunately still out. And finally, we very much like to continue with the exchange of experience so that we, among other things, can learn from what you have done to make teaching a more attractive profession than it is in Sweden. Thank you very much for your attention.